you to the Elisa Ann Rusch Burn Foundation for hosting this expression series. We're gonna ask that as people join us, if you guys would like to write your name in the chat box, there's 3 dots at the top of your screen. If you'd like to introduce yourself, write your name. We'll have a moment to introduce ourselves in just a moment, but feel free to write your name if you'd like. And as people join us, they can see your name in your screen. Welcome to all the participants. And it's so nice to see so many familiar faces. And welcome to the new folks I haven't met yet. To kick off this art workshop, I thought it might be fun to start with a little introduction in the chat. So you can go ahead and write your name, your location, and your relationship to the Elisa Ann Rusch Burn Foundation, if any. If you're a burn survivor or family member, you're welcome to include that. If you represent a burn unit or a fire station, you're welcome to include that. And if you don't have a connection to the Burn Foundation, you're also welcome here today. And we're so glad you can join us. So thank you for introducing yourselves. And as we enter into this shared space together, if you feel comfortable, let's take a moment just to enter the space as we begin this workshop. So if you feel comfortable, I'm going to invite you to inhale and allow yourself a deep exhale as we enter this space together. And if you need a deeper release, perhaps you've had a long day at the retreat, or you've had a long week, or maybe you've had a long pandemic, feel free to take a double. I'm going to invite you to take a double inhale, followed by a long exhale. Just let it all out. So this double inhale and the long exhale can soothe our sympathetic nervous system. And so this is a helpful way just to enter into the space. It's a simple relaxation technique. And at any point during the presentation, you can utilize this process to soothe yourself should you need to. And please also feel free to get up, to move around, to stretch, to get comfortable, and make yourself the most comfortable you can in any way you need to during our time together tonight. I'd love to offer you all a supportive, non-judgmental space to be with our group tonight and have a little bit of collaboration. And the format is pretty simple. The first section of the presentation is going to be very personal perspective. I'm going to share slides from my own burn survivor story and show you some of the samples of artwork that I generated in the early years of my own recovery process. And the second section of the presentation, the workshop, will familiarize ourselves with Art Kit. We'll explore ways to document your own journey through the arts, and I'll demonstrate a couple hands-on techniques that we can do as a group. If we have time, we'll have a quick Q&A, and then I'll also stay on the call in case folks want to make more art with some live feedback in your sketchbook. So, all right, let's begin. Double inhale, long exhale. So my own burn story as a survivor dates back to 2002. I was 24 years old. I had recently graduated from college with a degree in international relations. I had moved to South Africa to work as a research fellow at the University of Cape Town. 2 years into my stay, I survived a vicious arson attack. And as you can probably imagine, the impact was devastating. I sustained 2nd-degree burns on my arms from wrists to elbows and 3rd-degree burns on 25% of my total body surface, affecting my abdomen, my back, and most significantly impacting my lower legs and feet. At the time, Tygerberg Hospital was the only adult burn unit in the Western Cape of South Africa. So I spent the first month of my hospitalization at Tygerberg, and the incredibly skilled burn care team worked together to save my life. The first language spoken by all of the staff in the hospital was Afrikaans. Many of the nurses also spoke Xhosa, and English was translated on occasion by medical staff. The burn unit's ICU was an open bed unit, which means that there was no curtains between beds. And one of my most powerful memories from my time in the ICU at Tygerberg was hearing the nursing staff sing lullabies to patients during the night. I also witnessed the excruciating injuries of other burn patients in the ICU. And in retrospect, This was my first exposure to the community of burn survivors. These early experiences helped me regain a sense of human connection that provided a foundation of resilience that was really necessary to endure the many years of intense physical and emotional recovery that lay ahead. So while I was putting together this slide deck, I was undecided about whether to use this next photograph. On the one hand, the image is quite graphic, and as a heads up, it'll be on the screen for about 30 seconds in case you prefer to avert your eyes. On the other hand, the beautiful juxtaposition of the physical injury and the human interaction with my nurse is so deeply symbolic of the ways in which compassionate care can transform a hospital experience and reframe the hospital narrative that I decided it would be worthwhile to include. The photograph was taken 3.5 months into my hospitalization, and the watercolor painting on the left side of the page was made almost a year after my burn injury. Art making became a powerful tool to explore my physical and emotional state following my burn injury. Pictured on the right is a photo transfer print that references the stage of recovery and reflects that I was still disassociating with the emotional toll of the trauma at that time. As depicted by the crop of the head, you can't even see my face or head at all in the image. And while I'm pictured at the hospital in a wheelchair, you may notice that the surface of the print has a smoke-like appearance. And as many of you tonight know, severe injuries can alter one's sense of safety, mobility, independence, appearance, and even feelings of self-worth. Shock, devastation, and post-traumatic stress symptoms are common and normal reactions of a life-threatening injury. And in this print, for example, the way in which traumatic experiences can have a devastating impact on an individual's sense of self is, I think, what I look back on and highlight the most in this print. And I'll also take a moment here to note that there may be attendees on the call tonight, participants in our workshop, that may not have experienced a burn injury themselves. And that traumatic experiences of all kinds can be applied to this description of loss, whether it be the loss of a loved one, coping with undiagnosed depression, managing a chronic or life-threatening illness, or surviving the COVID-19 pandemic. Trauma exists in the body and it demands our attention, and it can be attended to through a creative process. In this image, my traumatized body, symbolized by the figure on the left, is looking down at the legs and feet of my former self. Some of you may recognize medical gauze applied to the print on the left-hand side of the page. And at that time, I was using medical supplies as tools for creating the painting as well. So in this print, I use the medical gauze to apply the paint to the page. Leaving the hospital after a burn injury is frequently viewed as a joyous occasion, and yet many patients are faced with a new set of challenges when they return home. Without adequate social emotional support, it's not uncommon for burn survivors to suffer in silence for months, years, and sometimes even decades, despite the fact that they may have survived the acute phase of the physical injury. So the pencil drawing on the left, for example, depicts the photograph that on the right that was taken by my father in the hallway of the burn unit at Tiger Brig Hospital just before transferring to a new hospital back in the US. While the walk itself was only a few feet in distance, which was all I could tolerate at the time, the hallway in the drawing appears to be endless, reflecting the feeling of immense overwhelm, while simultaneously, the figure on the left and the gathering of hospital staff on the right represent a collective strength of spirit and marks a tremendous milestone as I exited the ICU. From South Africa, I was transferred to the burn unit at Mass General Hospital in Boston. I spent another month at Mass General, underwent more surgeries, and eventually spent my final month of hospitalization at Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital. On the right is my physical therapist, one of my many physical therapists from Spalding. And on the left is a watercolor painting derived from this photograph. Pictured here is an acrylic painting of medical gauze in the background, and medical staples are depicted in the foreground. While not a traditional still life, these were relatable materials for me at the time. I also spent many months creating anatomical drawings of my lower legs and feet. These drawings helped me process the extent of my injury and familiarize myself with my new scars. They also helped me better understand my range of motion and mobility and develop comfort, empowerment, and pride in my new physical landscape. This is a watercolor painting based on an original photograph. It's quite large, it's actually almost life size, and you may notice the distorted scale of the body in this image. My legs are taking up most of the space on the page while my face is in the background, still unidentifiable. At the time of this painting, I was unable to find words to adequately describe my experience. But the art making process provided a safe and contained environment for nonverbal expression. It also allowed me the space and time to identify and recognize the physical symptoms and sensations associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD, and to begin to seek out professional support to more effectively address the PTSD symptoms and attend to the emotional and psychological effects of the trauma. And I'm proud to say I've worked very hard to manage my PTSD, and by naming it and recognizing how it shows up in my body, it's also helped me cultivate resiliency in other areas of my life and well-being that I couldn't have ever anticipated at the time of my injury. This image is an acrylic painting based on a photograph. It's taken in the hospital on the first day I relearned to walk. And now, as we enter into the art making phase of this workshop, let's take it one step at a time. To start, let's all just take a moment to move, to stretch, to double inhale and exhale, and to gather your art supplies. All you need for this workshop, if you have your art kit that was mailed to you, you can grab it and bring it close. All you really need is paper and a pencil. But the art kit is wonderful. Thank you to the Burn Foundation for distributing them. Bring them close if you have them. Make sure you're in a comfortable location. If you don't have the art kit and you have paper and pencil on hand, double check and see if you can grab an eraser as well, because we'll definitely be using that eraser. All right, does everybody have their art supplies out? Can I get a thumbs up or a digital thumbs up from those of you? All right, we're good to go. Okay, so how do we start? You have everything you need. You have your art kit, but there's one thing we're going to exit from this process as best we can: the inner critic, that little voice in the back of our minds that might try and convince us that we don't know what we're doing as we're making art. So let me assure you, not knowing is part of the art making process. That's where the magic happens, when we don't know exactly what we're doing and we begin to experiment and we follow the process through. So we can let that inner critic go as best we can. And as Bob Ross says, we don't make mistakes, we just make happy accidents. All right, so getting to know your art supplies. I'm going to invite everyone to take a few minutes to just scribble on the page. So get out your pencils, get out your supplies, make a little bit of a mess if you like, and begin by just scribbling on the page. What do you notice about your art supplies? So let's take a few moments and start to use your pencils. Get some scribbles, get some graphite, which is what's in your pencil, get it on the page. What do you notice? You can go ahead and write it in the chat, or you can unmute and share with the group. And give yourself a few moments to just kind of unwind. I'll also say that each pencil, I'm going to give you a hint here, each pencil works a little differently. So get to know them before I dive in with some information and explanations. And don't forget to get out that eraser. If that eraser is tucked into your art kit, pull it out too and begin using that on the page. All right, Justina, what a beautiful starting point here. Different shades and weights. Yes, so pencils all have different value gradations, different shades and different weights. And the way that pencils in this kit will organize themselves is that you can see on, does anyone notice the number, that there's a number and a letter on each of your pencils? Take a look. And I see Katie is partial to the 6B already. I'm actually love the 6B too, Katie. The 6B is your darkest shade in the continuum of your pencils. And it's going to give you the most soft interaction with the paper. So if you want to go dark and you want to go heavy on the graphite on your page, or spread the pencil marks all around your page quickly, the 6B or the 5B on that continuum is in that darkest shade level. Any other observations? I'll give you a chance to play. So a really beautiful observation that the 5H feels rough on the paper. And that's part of the drawing process, is not only looking at the pencils, but also considering your paper. The paper that is in your art kit is a great sketchbook to start with because it's small, it's mobile, you can move, you can take it around with you, you can throw it in your bag, in your purse. And it also, it's what we call hot press. So it has a really smooth surface. So the graphite that you're using from your pencil is going to sit on top of the surface of the paper. And each pencil will interact a little bit differently with the paper. Any other observations about there's one other tool we haven't talked about. I'll give you a hint. Feel free to unmute if you like, but I also want to give you a little time. All right, so the eraser. The eraser is just as important as your pencil. So as we are adding graphite, as we're adding drawing to the page, a really useful tool is also erasing. So removing and adding and removing and adding is an integral part of a drawing process, and one we're going to experiment a little bit with today. I'll also add that let me go back a couple slides to come back to the pencil. Right now, your pencils, if you haven't used them, they're probably pretty sharp because they haven't been used yet. But as you begin to experiment with them on the page and draw on the page in the course of our next few exercises, the edges of your pencils are going to be more dull the more you use them. And that tip of the pencil is going to give you a different mark on the page, depending if it's sharp or if it's dull. So now typically we want to sharpen our pencil right away and get it sharpened again. But I want to encourage you also to experiment with that dull edge of the pencil. And you may notice the way I'm holding my pencil is not necessarily the traditional way that one might be taught to write. When you're drawing and art making, I strongly encourage everybody to experiment with your grip on the pencil. You can certainly use that writing grip if it's available to you, but loosening your grip and using your pencil in all different ways really allows you to interact with the drawing in new and unexpected ways. It also taps into your neurological connection, the way in which your brain connects to the drawing on the page. I also recommend switching hands, not only using what might be your dominant hand, but switching to your non-dominant hand and switching back and forth. Okay, So there's lots of ways we can really loosen our approach to art making, and that can allow us to find a sense of curiosity as we enter into this process. Likewise, the eraser can have a sharp tip edge as it does in this photo. If it's clean and it's sharp, then when you erase, you can create really sharp lines. If it's dull and it has graphite on it, then you're going to be mixing graphite on the top of the page, and you might even be moving around the graphite on the page in a painterly way, as though you're moving paint on the page. So there's lots of different ways to use your eraser as well. And just as pencils, you can switch back and forth hands, you can loosen your grip, experiment with your own approach, and try approaches that are new to you. All right, so the first formal exercise I'm going to introduce to the group is a way of documenting your life story in a really simple landscape drawing. So the first step we're going to do is think about some of the, if our life story was a mountain range, we're going to think about some of the peaks in our life story. So for me, for example, one of my peaks is definitely the burn injury. That's a very high mountain peak at the beginning of my life story. In some ways, it overshadows many of the rest of my life peaks. So it could have been the only peak that I drew on my page. But I'm going to try and reinforce some of the other peaks in my life story that I want to focus on today. So I'll also add the COVID-19 pandemic as a peak, and I'll also include meeting my husband, my first job, the birth of both of my children, and those are going to be part of my mountain range. So before I show you a short video as an example of drawing this mountain range, think a little bit about 4 or 5 peaks. You can do as many as you want. The format that I've used is 4 or 5 peaks, but you could really think of as many as you want to document your life story. I'm going to show you a short video, which is also available in the chat if you want to take a look on your own, to demonstrate the way we can document these peaks and translate these milestone moments in our life story into a landscape drawing. All right, so here's our sketchbook. My first peak, as I mentioned, is my burn injury. And I'm shading with that 6H, that dark pencil, to get started. I've also included the COVID-19 pandemic, some medical scares that I had last year. And then there's my family, my kids, and then I'm adding some trees. We'll come to the drawing of the trees later because we'll do that in another exercise. The trees represent the support systems that lift us up during this process. So it started with those peaks. I'm going to play it one more time and walk you through it, and then you can try it on your own. You can start at any point. So you start really simply. Again, let that inner critic go. The peak of my burn injury, there's the peak of COVID-19, there's the medical scares, there's meeting my husband, my kids. Those are a little bit lower now, so I'm going to actually raise them and reinforce them on my life timeline. Then I'm going to start coloring them in any way you want. Use those values. And those trees are beginning to represent some of the pillars of support that I've had over the years. Or perhaps the intention of getting support that you might want in the future. So there's the quick visual cue. And take some time now to experiment with your supplies. Offer that inner critic another seat in the room and play around and see what comes up for you. Welcome, Lexi. Hi. So Lexi, we're just experimenting with our pencils and our art kit, scribbling on the page, getting to know the materials. And after you've done that for a few moments and play around with your supplies, we're doing a landscape drawing that represents some of the milestone moments in our life. And also giving ourselves the opportunity to highlight things that may not have gotten proper attention in our life trajectory. So I'll play a video here of an example. This is my example with my burn injury, starting out as the major milestone. COVID-19 is included, some medical scares I had last year. And then I've tried to reinforce some of the other life stories, life milestones, by adding another horizon line. You can use your pencils to color in. The B pencils are going to be darker. The H pencils are going to be lighter. And then if you'd like to add these triangle trees, it's a simple design. You can simply use triangles. We'll go over that a little more later on. Those can be the support structures that have guided you during those times. All right, just to get a feeling of time. I see some folks still working, so I'll give you a few more minutes. If you get to a point where you're at a pause, you can give me a thumbs up or a digital thumbs up, but we can take our time here. Lexi, another thing I've mentioned and that I encourage is to try new positions with your pencil. So explore all different grips, loose grips, grips that are not necessarily your typical writing position, to alternate between your left hand and your right hand, and to play and experiment with the way the pencils are used on the page. And we'll be using the eraser in one of our next exercises as well. Feel free to experiment with that now. All right, I see a little movement on the screen, a few heads popping up. If you're at a good point to pause, for those of you who are ready, you can go ahead and make sure you stretch, move around a little bit after that drawing session. And for those of you who are still working, you have time. You don't need to rush. We can come back to this as well. You can come back to it on your own. Are there any observations or anything that you noticed during that process? You're welcome to unmute if you'd like, or you can jot down your thoughts in the chat. Any observations that any of you brave participants would like to share in the chat, or unmute. Katie mentions loving the chance to get messy. And this is something that really brings us back to our childhood in some ways, really getting your hands messy. If you're noticing that your back of your palm is getting graphite on it as you draw, if you're at a good moment to pause and you want to check the back of your palm, you might notice the graphite is spread along your hand or your arm. You can, that's fine. You can also use a piece of paper to protect your sketchbook as you're drawing, and put another piece of paper down. So as your palm is on the page, it will protect you from getting the graphite, and it also will protect you from spreading the graphite around if you don't want it spread in that particular location. So Katie, that pigment on your hands can spread on the page. That can be intentional. That can be part of your work. And if it's not, having a scrap of paper at hand can be helpful. I hope your eraser is unwrapped by now. And Maddie mentions this is very relaxing. And I'll also add, so right now we're working in a small space. We're indoors, it's evening, but if you were to do the same exercise, as these kits are portable, and bring them to an outdoor location on a hike or a walk or take a break from work somewhere, and do the same exercise with an actual horizon and an actual landscape, you can still apply some of the same practices of thinking about your life milestones across that actual horizon and translate it into your sketchbook drawing. So the same activity can be applied outside. If you're outside, then the neurological connections between your eyes, your brain, and your sympathetic nervous system, which is the system that calms your body, are activated by the horizon line. And by opening your optical view to a wide horizon line and designing your lifeline with that visual reference of the actual horizon, you can process some of your life milestones while simultaneously calming your sympathetic nervous system. So I recommend trying this outside with an actual horizon as well. Yeah, Edwin, the overthinking is something that happens a lot. That's that inner critic, or there's all different ways to describe it. And sometimes I just try, and it happens to me, I've been, art making for decades now. And sometimes I find that if I that's when I kind of switch hands, or I loosen my grip, or I turn my paper upside down and try approaching it a different way. I also just try and notice that inner critic and allow myself not to judge it. It's okay if the inner critic enters, it's natural. And reorienting yourself physically can help with that sometimes. Yeah, Aurelie, if your trees come out small first, and same with any mountain lines, the nice thing about pencil is that the more you draw, and the same thing about this exercise, if your horizon line seems a little small, redraw it and it adds to the painting, or excuse me, it adds to the drawing. So that process is actually part of the process, to draw too small, to add some more, to go back and forth. The back and forth is the art making process. So that is inherent in the process. Ooh, Katie's jumping in, getting that eraser in and giving some snow caps on her mountain. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and enter us into the next exercise. For those of you who want to continue on the first one, you'll have a chance later. Yeah, Justina, I often feel outside of my comfort zone in the art making, and that's okay. And the trying part is actually, that is the art making, the trying. Change the page. It's like, I always think of you, because I know you're a writer, and try a different word, try a different mark on the page, try a different pencil, experiment, get curious. What might happen if? So we have a chance to do that next. So this next exercise is really utilizing our eraser, all right? And for those of you guys who are feeling a little outside of your comfort zone, this is the perfect next exercise, because we are gonna draw on the page, and then we're gonna erase a lot of our drawing and go back and forth with the put it down, pull it back, erase what we've done. I'm gonna ask everyone if you have a phrase or a quote or a mantra of some sort that has been a reference for you or helps you get through the day. You're welcome to write it in the chat if you'd like to share it with the group, or if somebody else might want to use your own. I always come back to one day at a time. That's when I come back to often. And that was a phrase that a patient, a 16-year-old patient, shared with me many years back, and I've kind of taken it on as my own phrase I like to come back to. So you can start with a phrase, and then we are going to draw another horizon line. This time it's going to be a sunset, and we're going to use the eraser to remove our sunset horizon from the page. I think my video might do the best job of explaining this one. Ooh, before I play the video, Justina wrote a mantra, a beautiful mantra from her book. Hope is the heartbeat. Hope is the heartbeat of survival. Beautiful. If anyone wants to use that, that's powerful. Hope is the heartbeat of survival. You can only do what you can do. If that speaks to you, you can write it on your page. I love that, Leah. Thank you. What is it? What is it you oh, this one I love. I'm going to start over. Thank you, Katie. What is it you plan to do with your wild and precious life? Beautiful. Ain't nothing to it but do it. All right, James, great transition to our video. Let's do it. So your horizon line straight across, half circle for your sun. Write your quote at the bottom. Use those values in any way you want to create a sunset. Any kind of sunset you want, it's a line and a half circle at its base. Shade it any way you'd like, and then use that eraser to pull away that reflection of the sunset on the page or the rays of sun going down. Now I have a little more time here in this video, so I've added another mountain line, but it's a simple process of writing your phrase, writing your mantra. Ain't nothing to it but to do it. Line across the page, half circle. That gets you your sunset horizon over the water. Shade any way you like. You can follow what I've done on this page loosely, but I really encourage you to experiment and play. And then use that eraser to create your reflection. And there are lots of other quotes and prompts. Thank you, James, for adding to the chat. Take the one that speaks to you most or intrigues you and play. See what happens here. Oh, I see it's a poem that we got on the I love that Mary Oliver has entered this workshop. Thank you, James and Katie. And Kelly, thank you for yours. Love more, fear less, float more, steer less. Ooh. The Uses of Sorrow by Mary Oliver. In my sleep, I dreamed this poem. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. So try that eraser from all different angles. You can take the wrapper all the way off. Turn your paper upside down if you get stuck. Draw some more, and then flip it back right side up. Rivera adds, Hakuna Matata. Yes, Justina, you're warming up. You're warming up a little bit. That's the process. You're starting to warm up. Sometimes it's the work that we don't expect that surprises us too. This exercise is also an opportunity to simply scribble on the page and then use your eraser to carve out that horizon and that sunset. If you iterate, if you try this exercise again on your own, you can write the quote after you create the drawing as well. Hi, Pradnya, welcome. Hello, Yates Barella family. We're glad you're here.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. Sorry I'm late.
It's all good. We're glad you could make it. We have our art kit out. You can also use paper and pencil and an eraser. It all works. And we're experimenting with the tools and materials. And we are creating a horizon on the page with a sunset. It's a line with a half circle. You can experiment with the dark pencils, the B's of your pencil kit, and the light pencils, the H's, and play around. We also have some beautiful quotes and poems and mantras on the page, words to live by in the chat. And you're welcome to come up with your own for this exercise or use any of the ones that have been offered in the chat.
Oh, cool. Okay, I will get started. Thank you.
Take your time. And if you don't have time to finish this, you can circle back to the video and continue working on it. That's sort of the point, is that we get started in our sketchbooks and we can continue on with these sketchbooks.
Perfect. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you too. All right, our folks, I see a couple heads up. You guys need a little more time? Are you ready to move on to the next exercise? Let's jump. Oh, yes, hold it up there. Who is that? I can't see your name right now. Hold on. Let me see that name. Can you hold it up even closer? It's glowing on my computer. Hakuna Matata, your Hakuna Matata, your sunset is glowing. Beautiful. So that can stay in your sketchbook. This can live in your sketchbook. You can come back to it anytime you want in the sketchbook, or you could pull that out of your sketchbook and put it on your fridge. Put it at the edge.
It's going in a frame.
What did you say?
It's going in a frame.
It's going in a frame. I love it.
My son created it. I'm a one-hand bander right now, so he's an artistic person. So
collaboration at its best.
Yeah, I gotta show you his Picasso after class. He did an awesome Picasso for his final art class.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
I recommend having him write his name on it, somewhere sign it, and write the date as well. So you can then pinpoint this moment in time. And then when you look back on it, it takes on that meaning of this moment in time in his life.
Excellent. Good idea. Thank you.
So I love the idea of putting it in work environments too, if you need that quote ahead of you. All right. So I'm going to jump to the next exercise here. All right. So the next exercise, same materials. We're going to do a little throwback to the landscape drawing activity. We're going to go into a little more depth. So this one is focused on those support mechanisms in your life. Maybe it's family. Maybe if you're someone who doesn't have that support from family, maybe it's your other community members. Maybe it's your pet. Maybe it's your child. Maybe it's your grandparent. Maybe it's your maybe it's the burn unit that you came from. Maybe it's your work staff. It could be so many different people. Support networks. It could be things too. You can take it in a lot of different directions. But I wanted to give you a prompt for those trees from the earlier landscape drawing. So if you go back to doing landscapes at some point, you have this prompt, and you can also use it to develop your support network. If you have never drawn trees before, there's a simple starting point that can give you at least the framework to see the tree, and then you can take it in your own direction. So really simple. You just start with triangles, a row of triangles straight in a row. And then you can go ahead and outline with your own style and your own flair. And it depends on your pencil. Maybe you have the dark pencil, maybe you have the dull pencil or the sharp pencil. Your tree will look different depending on your tool and the way you apply the tool. So you can do this in so many different ways. There's no right or no wrong. I'm gonna play this one more time. And the focus on the support in your life or your intended support, your hopes for support are the focal point for this exercise. You notice that I wrote down my list and then I erased it and then I wrote it down again, and then I had a little more time, so I added a backdrop, and you can still use that sunset technique with the erasing the sun, and it could be nighttime, it could be a moon. It's really simple, starting with triangles and then adding your own flair. And Aurelia, you mentioned earlier drawing those trees on the smaller side. This is the perfect example of that process. You draw on the smaller side, as I did in this video, and then you extend them out a little bit. You could use that the 6B pencil or the 5B pencil, the darker one, to outline them. So drawing things the first time around and then iterating and changing them and developing them, that's all part of the process. So there's no wrong start to this. All right, so the last exercise, if you're not done, this is a great one to come back to on your own. It can continue on. The last exercise that we're going to do today is a gratitude tree or a gratitude plant. All right, so this is a simple process, maybe you've done it before, of thinking about all the different aspects of your life that you might find, in which you might find gratitude. It could be a person, it could be a pet, it could be an experience, it could be so many different things. You're welcome to write some examples in the chat if something comes to mind that you'd like to share with the group. And I recommend for this one, if you haven't already flipped your sketchbook and tried a different orientation, this is a good time to do so. So I recommend with this exercise, get lengthwise. Is the top so you're new and unexpected way. And that time you come back to your sketch traditional way on. You can really experiment, and tonight or a few, you could also represent the stem with a few leaves tonight, and then when you re-enter this process on another day or another year or 10 years from now, you come across this journal and you add some leaves to that plant. All right, so I'll play the video here. So the leaf can simply be a triangle shape, but really any shape you want. I colored in that pot. You can if you choose to. I also switched hands back and forth. Again, that kind of helps keep you out of that inner critic mode. And the writing becomes part of the artwork. I'm gonna play it one more time. cobra and sunflower. I'm seeing the horizon photograph in your background. That I don't know if it's a photograph. I'm guessing it's a photo in your background, and thinking about that as a reference point for the milestone drawings too. I really like working from photographs because it's really accessible and it can reflect like a place you've been, and then add on a layer of current intention to it as well.